Hello, everybody. Welcome to Dr. Kim's Scholarship and Journey. This morning, I'm going to talk about the biblical interpretation. I'm going to share with you my PowerPoint screen. Just a second. So the question is, what is biblical interpretation? So we need to think about this question. What is the Bible? Regardless of whose Bible we talk about, whether it's of a Protestant or Catholic or even Jewish Bible, the bottom line is the Bible is not a single book nor a single authored book. Bible, actually the word derived from the Greek word biblia, which means books. So the Bible is not a single book, but many books. It is a product of a long process of writing and editing and re-editing of more than 1,000 years. It contains many different kinds of writings we call genres. The author is not God as used to be, although the Bible is inspired in many different ways. Depending on the theory of inspiration, we can say that certainly the Bible is product of inspiration, but nevertheless, it is human recording and human medium. It does not contain a single story or a single theology or view of God or humanity or of the world. Obviously, it tells us of divergent stories about many different communities over time, and it is religious yet ideological, political product. So this kind of thing is really the bottom line with which we need to think about the further biblical interpretation. Now, more narrowly, what is then a biblical interpretation? So three things we have to consider. First, reader. It is an act of reading a biblical text and explaining them in a variety of ways. In every interpretation, the reader is involved, right? Readers act of reading biblical texts and explaining them in a variety of ways. That is the essence of what biblical interpretation is. But more than that, when we read text, we certainly read for purposes. Some may read for their devotional purposes. Others may have interest in historical critical knowledge. Still others have more interest in moral guidance in their life today. So this involves interpretive choice. The last thing we have to consider is the very text, right? We are reading the text, in this case, biblical text. So we may focus on historical, social, or cultural dimensions of text, or on narrative or story dimensions of the text, or even on ideological, political nature of the text. This all involves textual choices. When we interpret the Bible, actually we have to have this kind of difficulties in, I would call, 3 layers of difficulty in biblical interpretation. 3 layers of difficulty in biblical interpretation. The first layer is matters of text. This is the area of study we call textual criticism. We do not have copies of the original text. In the case of the New Testament, there are more than 5,000 copies of fragmented Greek manuscripts. All this leads to the question that, how can we know what Jesus really said, for example, when we read the Gospels, right? So the matter of the, secure text. The second layer of the, problem or difficulty is matters of translation. Certainly, many people do not read the Hebrew or Greek text directly, but they're reading translations. So in that case, which translation is conveying what proper one? Which translation is authoritative, right? So that is another layer of problem. The third last layer of the problem is matters of interpretation. Think about even if you have a very secure early kind of a text, and with a good translation, when you read a certain text, but still you have to interpret. In other words, you have to explain that text. That is a third layer of the biblical interpretation. So biblical interpretation is a complex enterprise and process. So here I'm going to talk about three elements of a biblical interpretation. So reader, first of all, the question is, why do you read, right? Why do you read? Here we have to consider reader's context and need. In other words, contextual choice is important. In the middle part, reading lens. Here the question is, what to read? What do you read, right? This involves reader's interest or lens, or interpretive lens, or some people say hermeneutical or interpretive choice. The last element is about the very text. How do you read? How do you treat the text? As a historical or narrative document or ideological document, reader's textual method, right? Here the choice you can make is textual choice. What kind of method? How do you treat the text? All these three elements have to be considered in your biblical interpretation. If we talk about the text, how to read a text, there are many different ways of reading the text, but if I, divide them into three big camps, three big kind of approaches to reading the text, three kinds of textual methods. The first one is meaning behind the text. So to speak, seeking the meaning of a historical, information. So here text serves as a means or window. Text as means or window. The next level of understanding of the text is meaning within the text. So we treat text as a kind of a medium or video or like a picture in the park, right? So we treat the medium, the text on its own. So reading it as a story, for example, that is a meaning within the text. The last dimension of a textual method we call meaning in front of the text. So here text serves as a mirror. So you look into the text and you kind of reflect on kind of a world you live in. So text and you as a reader have conversations. So meaning occurs in front of the text, not merely in the text or behind the text, but somewhere in between the text and you. So we see here three kinds of textual choices. Now, we can consider biblical interpretation as process, right? So when we are reading the Bible, that is an act actually. We as readers, reading as an activity, text is the object, okay? When we are reading the text, we must choose three kinds of choices. First of all, contextual choice. That is about the reader, who we are as a reader, what kind of social location we live, what kind of issues we bring to the text, what kind of need we need today. So contextual choice. Hermeneutical choice have to do with kind of a reading lens, right? What do we read in the text? For example, if we read John 14:6, right? So we have a need of encouragement in our life today, or need of comfort. Then we may focus on Jesus' comfort language in John 14:6. When Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father except through me, that text can be read against the backdrop of the Johannine community, which was expelled from the Jewish synagogue, right? So Jesus comforts his disciples in the context of the Johannine community. So the adopted textual method can be historical or literary approach to the Johannine community. So biblical interpretation involves a process. Now, criteria for biblical interpretation. Because biblical interpretation involves, elements and the process, certainly multiple interpretations are possible, right? We have to celebrate the diversity of interpretations, but it doesn't mean that not all interpretations are equally good or valid. So we have to ask, what is criteria for healthy interpretation? What is good interpretation? We may differ from each other about this, but we need to discuss a set of criteria applicable to our communities and society. It may be justice. Then the further question is, what kind of justice are you talking about? Is it holistic justice and solidarity? So we need to discuss, right, further about this criteria. So all I have talked so far is actually coming from my book, Biblical Interpretation, Theory, Process, and Criteria. In this book, Kim expertly brings to the fore the essential elements of interpretation, the reader, the text, and the reading lens, and attempts to explore a set of criteria for solid interpretation. While celebrating the diversity of a biblical interpretation, Kim warns that not all interpretations are valid, legitimate, or healthy because interpretation involves the complex process, what he calls critical contextual biblical interpretation. He suggests that readers encourage with the text. Readers engage with the text by asking important questions of their own. Why do we read? How do we read? And what do we read? In most recent book that I co-authored with Mrs. Smith, the title, Toward Decentering the New Testament. Here in the introduction, we both, Ms. Smith and I have a conversational dialogue with a set of common questions. So the title of the chapter is Invitation to Dialogue, right? So what is biblical interpretation? We understand. So although we are reading with a critical spirit, when we read a text, but still we are differing in some sense. So if you see this introductory chapter, it will be greatly helpful for you. Toward Decentering the New Testament is the first introductory text to the New Testament, written by an African-American woman biblical scholar and an Asian-American male biblical scholar. This text privileges the voices, scholarship, and concerns of minoritized, non-white peoples and communities. It's written from the perspectives of minoritized voices. The first few chapters cover issues such as biblical interpretation, immigration, Roman slavery, intersectionality, and other topics. Questions raised throughout the text focus readers on relevant contemporary issues and encourage critical reflection and dialogue between student-teachers and teacher-students. This is the end of my presentation today. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like this video if you like it. Also, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Visit my official Google blog if you're interested more about this, and Google my name. Thanks so much. See you next time. Bye-bye.